God, how he hated screaming, especially when it was children screaming in nothing but pure terror and pain. And pain screaming was the only thing he was surrounded by. He woke up with a startled gasp, a scream climbing halfway up his throat before he managed to force it back down, and forced his mind to focus on where he was. Obviously, he wasn't at the house with all those annoying sons of brats, but where he was now wasn't exactly somewhere he wanted to be. The wilderness, home of the hunter. Admittedly, despite himself, he felt a lump form in his throat and a flash of fear enter his system. However, he forced the fear down into the pit of his stomach, as he needed to use both his wits and skills to survive. Survive. A rule that was forced upon every single child that ever existed within this world, especially the ones with parents left that had closed off their homes from the viewers, even him with much worse results. Ugh. He growled with fury at the sour memories, his hands clutching into tight fists as anger started to flood his mind. However, he shook his head to clear it of any other thoughts, choosing to focus instead on what was going on in front of him and what he had to do. Those memories were long ago, even if they hurt him, and made him so angry that he wanted to rip out his own hair in clumps. They weren't important anymore. The only thing that was at the moment was surviving in this place, no matter what the cost was. He sighed harshly. He knew what the cost was, but right now, he didn't want to think about it as it wasn't important, or was too painful to think about. He shook his head and focused his gaze on the forest. Despite the fact he could probably see terrifying faces within the woods, he still took in a deep breath to loosen up before he entered the woods, hoping to put his skills to the test and survive. The wilderness was silent. Way too silent for his comfort if he was being honest with himself. And he thought all that time wandering around the deserted roads of the Pale City Harbor had prepared him for the silence that would sometimes take over the world whenever the adults went away temporarily. However, it seemed that he was wrong, as he was starting to become nervous while trekking through the woods. When he began this shit, he honestly expected to come across the usual type of animals that he knew for sure lived out in the forest, such as moose and the like. But there was nothing, other than a light fog covering the land and fading moonlight from the huge storm clouds in the sky. Hell, there wasn't even the faintest hint of a breeze that would usually pass over the area. It was almost like the wilderness had been abandoned, or worse. Something far more worse had taken over the forest that he didn't know about. "What's going on?" he whispered to himself fearfully, head turning in different directions to look around the uncomfortably quiet forest, his eyes narrowing in both fear and concern. Everything was silent and still, like he kind of came to expect, considering how unnervingly silent the wilderness was. But he swore to someone, anyone who was up in the sky or something of that shit, he could see dark faces in those bushes. But that was a silly idea to consider. Or at least, it would be a silly idea to consider if it wasn't for the world they lived in being absolutely fucked. Okay, maybe the Pale City was fucked, considering all the weird adults or viewers, as the other children called them, and the world-bending transmission tower that sat in the middle of the city, doing who knows what to the city with its slave and battery, the Thin Man, the second most feared adult next to the lady, who ruled over the maw and the ocean. Truthfully, if the Pale City Harbor had any monsters that were as weird as the viewers, the teacher, the doctor, and the Thin Man, then the boy would also add that place to his list of the weirdest/scariest places he's been to. But he hadn't found anything beside the old town, the shipwrecks, and the two weird half-human, half-fish corpses resting upon the remains of one. He gave a faint shudder as his mind thought back to the sight of two half-water-covered bodies resting against the remains of an old fishing boat, with eyes that seemed to be staring right at him with hunger. and seemed to be following him, before he slapped both hands against his face to snap him back to reality. Perhaps he didn't do it fast enough, 'cause his foot caught onto something, and he was sent tumbling to the ground. The sound of bushes and rope rustling from somewhere close to him sounded, and in near seconds, a large cage came rushing down at him. He noticed this out of the corner of his eye, gasping in both surprise and fear at the sight rushing right at him at the near speed of light. Luckily for him, his quick reflexes kicked in, and he immediately rolled out of the way of the oncoming danger at the last second. The sound of an object crashing into the ground sounded for a few seconds, before everything fell silent once again, minus the boy's heavy panting from having gotten himself out of a situation that could have ended badly. He shut his silver and green eyes as he heaved for air. He rested a hand against his ribcage so hard he worried it would burst out of his chest. Sweat drenched his face, causing his short black hair to stick to his head and forehead, along with drool running down his lips. He raised the hand off his chest as his heart rate calmed down, and wiped the sweat and drool off his face. Once his face was cleared, he carefully sat himself into a sitting position and opened his eyes, hand brushing aside what remained of his hair to see the scene more perfectly. His eyes widened when he took notice of the large cage that was several feet away from him, thanks to him rolling the fuck out of the way of impending danger. He couldn't really tell from the distance he was sitting, but he swore to see the bottom of the cage fitted with sharp blades, buried deep into the ground from the force of the fall. No doubt these were razor-honed, a warning of what would happen if he either stayed where he was or hadn't moved out of the way in time. Even if he had seen some serious fucked up shit back in the house in Pale City, even Les couldn't help but say, "What the hell?" he gasped, scooting a few more feet backwards away from the cage, eyes widening to their maximum. "What is going on here? Is there a new monster out here that I didn't know about?" Gulping down his fear, the boy placed his bare feet and hands on the ground, so he could get back up and dust himself off, dusting his dirty leather coat that he snagged from another kid from the house before he escaped the Thin Man somehow. Being a badass survivor probably had something to do with this, the black stitches tugging with his movements. Les took one last look at the metal cage before deciding to pick up the pace to get as far away from this place as possible. Not too much so he missed any possible red flags, and not too slowly to ensure he could outrun a monster, should one pop up or something. It was a useful skill for him to have, as that meant he could keep aware of his surroundings while also avoiding adults at the same time. Win-win, really. However, this tactic was far from foolproof, as even though Les could keep ahead of the monsters that now ruled this world, there were several times in his life where he would miss traps that some of the adults would set up in order to catch children who would have the nerve to cross onto their territory, then get injured. They weren't anything too serious, but that didn't mean bigger damage won't come Les's way if he wasn't careful. But just as long as he could keep his wits about him, then the traps should be avoidable? Nope! 'Cause less than 10 fucking seconds later, Les's right foot caught itself onto a rope, and soon he was sent tumbling a few feet into the ground, before a snare net that was buried into the leaves made its approach. Luckily for him, the speed he was running at sent Les a safe distance away before the net could catch him. By some crazy quick reflexes, he managed to catch himself by throwing his hands out and throwing himself into the air in an odd sort of backflip, then catching himself on a tree even with shaky limbs. After the shock of narrowly meeting death/danger for the second time wore off, Les panted heavily on the tree for a few seconds to regain his breath, before carefully and slowly slipping down the tree. Well, that was too close, he muttered to himself, wiping a layer of sweat off his brow. He snapped his gaze toward the snare net, before turning around and darting back into the woods, this time making his pace a little slower so he could avoid the traps and not make stupid, fatal, or near-fatal mistakes. He already made 2 mistakes and nearly died in the process. He didn't want to make any more if he wanted to survive on his own. This tactic worked, praising the Lord, as with his legs not going at a reckless speed, he was able to keep track of his surroundings better than when he was going at a neck-break pace. Because of this, he was able to dodge 2 lines obviously containing 2 more metal cages or snare nets. He didn't care to know which were hiding under the leaves, and make it to a forest clearing. Upon reaching the clearing, Les decided to stop here and make camp for the night. All that running had tired him out, and even someone like him needed a break whenever he got tired from a good day's work of surviving. However, he wasn't dumb enough to sleep out exposed to the elements or a monster, so he carefully searched around the clearing till he found a small empty cave. Les grinned and crawled his way to the cave, curled up against the wall before passing out.